People with synesthesia experience everyday life in extraordinary ways, yet it is a neurological phenomenon that is not often discussed. In this video, we will discuss different types of synesthesia, what synesthesia is, possible causes, and future applications. Synesthesia is an unusual perceptual experience in which an inducer stimulus triggers a percept in a different domain in addition to its own, so someone could perceive the letter A as being red. And this additional percept is not grounded in external stimuli. So these accompanying sensations caused by synesthesia supplement but do not replace the usual modality-specific perceptions. Synesthesia can be translated from Greek as joint perception, and there are many different variations of synesthesia. There are actually 61. The most common variations are mere touch and grapheme color synesthesia. Mere touch synesthesia is an experience in which observing touch to another person evokes tactile experiences on the observer's own body. And these tactile experiences can be experienced mirrored, so on the opposite side of the body, or anatomical, on the same side. It's also been studied that it is a frequent co-occurrence with autism spectrum disorder, which is very interesting and will likely incite further research. Grapheme color synesthesia is one of the most common types. Individual letters of the alphabet and numbers, or even musical notes, are perceived as being inherently colored. You could perceive letter A as being red and become used to this, and then when you see a blue A, you might find it weird. This is called the synesthetic Stroop effect. Sound color synesthesia is another common variation. This is when the experience of sound involuntarily evokes an accompanying experience of color. And again, this concurrent experience is not grounded in external stimuli. Research has been done exploring the relationship between synesthesia of various types and creativity. A very cool example of this is the Irish abstract expressionist artist, Jack Coulter. Jack Coulter is a synesthete of the sound color variety, and he listens to music and does paintings. So on the left we have Take On Me by Aha, and on the right, Hallelujah by Jeff Buckley. A very interesting example of what one can do with synesthesia. There is quite a lot of debate about what causes synesthesia, and there are a number of opposing hypotheses, and this is likely due to the highly varied form of the phenomenon. So the first hypothesis we're going to talk about is synesthesia is a result of atypical crosstalk between brain functions, and this could be a result of too much white matter. So this was discussed by Simner in 2016. It could also be a result of a failure to prune early abundant connections in the normal infant brain. And this is interesting because it's more of a developmental hypothesis rather than a behavioral one. Another hypothesis is that it may involve parietal areas and parietofrontal networks because those are involved in attention, and it's been proven that the conscious experience of synesthetic colors does require attention to the stimulus. Finally, crosstalk between modalities of perception in the brain that does not typically happen in normal human brains may be responsible. These researchers also concluded that synesthesia may not be an error or quirk in connectivity, but rather a functional brain state that is a consequence of optimizing sensory input. To explore this, they used a computational neural model, which we will talk about next. So this is a graphic representation of the neural network they designed to explain what's going on for synesthesia. So the neural network consists of two interacting modalities, which are connected neural systems. So each modality has a set of input neurons and a set of output neurons. There are feed-forward connections within each modality, but not between them. There are recurrent connections among all the output neurons. The subset of recurrent connections that connect the two modalities are referred to as crosstalk interactions, and the goal of the network is to optimize the representation of the combined input from both sets of input neurons by the neurons at the combined output layer. So this model was designed to explain sequence space synesthesia related to numbers, and they found that in some scenarios, such as sensory deprivation or heightened plasticity, synesthesia can evolve, even though the two inputs to the two systems are statistically independent and the initial crosstalk indicators are 0. So the interesting consequence of this study was that it led the researchers to conclude that synesthesia was not a result of some aberration of connectivity, but rather a functional brain state that can emerge as a consequence of optimizing sensory information. So synesthesia may seem to be a pretty narrow or niche subject, but there are some pretty cool applications to it. The first is research relating synesthesia and creativity. So as we've seen with Jack Coulter, you can do some really cool things with sound color synesthesia as well. Drug-induced synesthesia is a very interesting area of research. Some good ways of getting at this info is PsycInfo and Google Scholar are fantastic resources for tracking down neuroscience papers and all kinds of scientific papers. And finally, 2 Minute Neuroscience is a fantastic channel on YouTube that explains neuroscience concepts in 2 minutes. Thank you very much for listening. And if you guys are interested in any of the studies we mentioned, they are in our references list.